Hi, my name is Michael. I'm the media manager for the El Paso Spine Center and Dr. Dean Smith. Dr. Smith loves sharing information with patients, and part of that information is sharing surgical videos with patients. Surgeries both of the entire room as Dr. Smith sees them and close-ups of Dr. Smith's point of view during a procedure itself. To help with that, he purchased a system called the SWIS Surgical Video System. It is a head-mounted system that is wireless that'll allow Dr. Smith to walk around the room without having to worry about being attached to something while recording videos from his perspective. It seems like a great system, and I was very excited when Dr. Smith ordered it. So it arrived, and we started opening it up, and I started putting it together, and I realized I had a few questions about how it was assembled. I went to go check and see if there was a manual, and I couldn't find one online. So I eventually figured out the system. It's not incredibly complicated, but it's one of those things that if you had a primer for it, it would make things a whole lot easier. So we're going to talk about the system, what it is, how to set it up, and some of the different features that go along with it. So come on and let's put this thing together. Like I said, this is the SWIS Surgical Video System. It comes in this self-contained backpack, pretty heavy duty, nice, sturdy. It's designed for surgeons to record their procedures on. And while it's great for that, the nice thing about this is it lets the surgeon actually see what they're recording. But let's open this up and kind of see what's inside of it and see how we can go about setting it up. Now, the backpack has several different pouches we need to talk about. The first one is here in the back, and when we open that up, we pull out documentation for the different parts of the system. You see, the SWIS surgical system is several different systems all pre-assembled for you, or at least pre-put together for you, so that it's very easy to set up and they all work together harmoniously to record a video system. All the documentation for the different parts are there. We're going to go over what those parts are. And something else to make note of is this is a pretty good backpack, and that component could also be used for carrying laptops or iPads to surgery that I know a lot of surgeons use. Now, there are a couple of different openings here that we need to talk about. On the very top of the system, there's a zipper. All that does is it lets you into the main compartment. It's kind of too small to take anything out of. There's also a zipper here that opens up a larger opening. And right inside, you're going to see that there is a bag there. We're going to get to what that bag is in a second. I would actually kind of leave this top part alone because the best way to get into the main compartment is actually through this largest outer zipper. And what that does is it opens up into everything we're going to need for the system. It's all right here. It's very easy to access. And we're going to go through what all these parts are. I'm going to see how they put together. So let's start up here at the top. And we're going to pull out this bag. Forgive me as I move things around a little bit. And this bag right here, it is actually, besides being a SWIS Surgical branded backpack, this actually contains the main headpiece for the unit. The headpiece comes pre-assembled with all the cables you're going to need, but what each of those cables do and where they attach kind of threw me for a little bit, which is one of the reasons I wanted to make this video. But if we go over the different parts of the headgear, we're going to see that there is a GoPro mount on the front, highly articulated. It can be put at just about any angle from the front. There's also a gray connection piece right here. This does come off. I remember when I first got this, it was attached, and it took me a while to figure out that actually pops out. This is where our viewfinder is going to go. We're going to come back to that in a few minutes. On the headgear itself, there are a number of cables. There are two micro HDMI cables. One is on a much shorter lead, one is on a little longer lead. One goes to the GoPro, one to the viewfinder. We're going to come back to that. There is a power supply for the GoPro that we're going to use. There's also a micro HDMI that's the power supply for the viewfinder. One additional piece is there's a GoPro mount on the side right here. That's where the GoPro itself is actually going to mount. We'll come back to that in just a few minutes. These pieces, they all connect through this long cable, and they terminate into two USB plugs, a full-size HDMI, and a mini HDMI. Now, this also threw me for a little bit when I first got the system, but I figured out how it works in order to enable the full wireless capabilities of the system. So before we get into setting up the headgear, let's take a look at the backpack again and talk about that wireless system for a minute. So back in our backpack, we have, this is a plastic clip that can be used for cable management. When you get into the main pieces, there are a lovely microfiber cleaning cloth. In the center part of the console, there are two large USB bricks. We're going to come back to how we use those. Each one has four full-size USB outs and one micro USB in for charging. We're going to come back to those in a little bit. There is a Atomos Ninja Assassin. This is a great recorder. This is going to be used in the wireless system to help record our setups. If you haven't used these before, they're really easy to use. Inside of the Atmos system, there is a 480 gigabyte SSD, useful for, I don't know if it's an SSD or an actual hard drive. I think it might actually be a hard drive. But this is what we're going to be using to record our wireless system onto the Atomos Ninja. The Ninja comes with two batteries pre-attached. Those pop off really easily. We're also going to see that you can actually plug this in to the wall using an adapter, which I'll show you guys in just a minute. We're going to set this aside because we're about to set this up. There is a wireless HDMI receiver. It is very simple to set up. There is a mounting point on the bottom if you want to mount it somewhere, but there's also several different ports on the top. One is an HDMI port, one is USB. I wouldn't really use that one right now. There's also a micro USB to get power to it. Speaking of power, the next pouch in our bag had two plug-in adapters. One that's a plug to a micro USB, which is what we're going to use to power the HDMI wireless receiver. There's also a plug-in adapter for the Atomos. We are going to be using that here so we can set it up and not have to worry about our batteries dying. Incidentally, if you look on the outside pouch, there are two full-size, full-to-full HDMI cables. We're going to end up using both of these. I think there's a smaller one, a longer one. The longer one I'm going to use with the wireless system. I think I'm going to be investing in a smaller one for the Doctor because, well, you'll see why when we set up our actual headgear system. I'm going to take the smaller one, set that aside for the headgear, take the larger one, set that aside for USB. There's also chargers for the batteries for the Atomos system, and a collection of cables, things you might use and might not. I think they threw in a bunch of extra cables just in case. Power to plug in the battery charger. There is a power supply that is both USB to Lightning and USB to micro USB if you need that for power. There are two USB to actually mini USB cables for power or whatever else you need. I didn't find these necessary when I set up our system right away, but you'll see that we will get into those in a little bit. I'm going to pull out the power supplies so we can use those in our setup later on. The next two parts in the backpack are the handy dandy pouch for carrying your supplies. We're going to come back around to that when we set up our headgear system. And let me move this guy. This small case logic case. Again, we're going to use this when we get into our heads-up system, but I just wanted to show you that it's in there as well. That's mostly for our heads-up wireless system, or a heads-up recording system. So let's talk about our wireless system for just a minute. I have a handy-dandy power supply right here. And we're going to be taking our Atomos, our wireless transmitter, and we're going to be plugging both of those guys in. So I'm just going to do a very simple plug. I'm going to take the micro USB, plug that into the receiver, and it will kick on. You can run this Atomos recorder entirely on batteries. This is a Ninja Blade. It's a very good recorder. For this demonstration purpose, I'm going to plug it in so we can see what it's like running on just a power supply. And then you take the power supply and you plug it in just like you would a battery. The power button is on the right-hand side of the unit. You press it once, and the unit will then, in just a minute, you'll see the Atomos signal, and it'll start to turn on. Now, to connect our wireless system to our wireless receiver, we have our HDMI. It's very simple. Plug the HDMI in here, and I'm going to keep this cable coiled for the moment just for space purposes. HDMI, make sure you put it into the in slot. It's very easy to get those mixed up. I've actually mixed those up before and then wondered why my system wasn't working. But I'm going to plug in the HDMI, and for the moment, we're not getting anything because we don't have any signal going to our wireless receiver. So we have our wireless receiver and recorder set up, but we're not receiving anything because we haven't set up our wireless transmitter yet. So let's set these aside for the moment. I'm going to leave those right over here. Now let's take a look at our headgear and that pouch that we brought out earlier. So we have our headgear here. I'm just going to worry about the top part of the headgear for the moment because that's the part where we're going to be doing our starting work. In this pouch, and I tried to set this up the way that we got it just so there wasn't any confusion between what you're going to get versus what you see, but it might be a little bit different in here and there. There are several different components of the headgear that we're going to use. Probably the primary component, and the first thing that should stand out to you, is the GoPro with the lens system and sensor on this cable. It's a pretty cool little system. They're not the first people to do this, but it is a system that works really well. The lenses, I'm going to move that around. You do actually get a set of lenses, which you can simply unscrew from here. They unscrew and you can screw back on. There is a, go ahead and unscrew this real fast. I'm going to be careful with this sensor because I don't want it uncovered very long. I don't want anything to get on the sensor. When you replace when you remove the lenses to replace them, try to be careful about getting anything on your sensor that can really mess up your images. There's a adapter so you can actually get in your focus where you want it for all of these lenses. But they simply screw in, and the tighter you screw them in, the more it's going to affect your focus. So before you get into the sterile field, make sure you set your focus and check what you're recording before you go in, because you don't want a full video of just an out of focus shot. That wouldn't be any good. You do get several different lenses in here as well. 1.5 times, one is a 2 times magnification, one is a 3 times magnification, just to get closer into the shot if you want. You can play around with those. A couple of other pieces. There is a micro USB adapter, because there is actually a micro USB, we'll talk about this in just a second. There is actually a micro USB card in the GoPro. You can actually record onto the GoPro directly during surgery. If you don't want to do the wireless system, or if you just want to back up because you never know if something might happen. Interesting thing here, there is a little USB dongle plugged into the GoPro. That is actually nothing. It's just a reminder that that port on the GoPro is not used. So leave that in. Make sure you're not plugging anything into it. You don't need it. The only thing you're going to need is the HDMI out, which we're going to get to that in just a minute. It does come with a battery, but we're not going to be using it because we're going to be running through the power supply. You do have this little, looks like an L-shaped device. This is actually the viewfinder, so you can see what you're recording during the surgery. It's a really cool HDMI wireless transmitter. This is what actually gets the signal from your GoPro into the wireless system. But we'll come back to that in just a minute. When I first got it, it was attached with an HDMI female-to-female adapter, we are going to be using that, so don't lose that. But I'm going to set that over here for now. The other things you're going to find in this case, there is an HDMI to DVI adapter if you want to have your HDMI feed go to a monitor. There's also another female-to-female HDMI adapter, and there's also a mini HDMI to full-size HDMI, which we are going to be using. I'm going to leave that in here for the moment so you can come back to it and we know where it is. Inside of this upper pouch is the docking station for the hard drive from the Atomos. You just this is a blank drive. You can actually put another hard drive into this. That's a little beyond the scope of this video, but you can put another hard drive into this to have multiple recording hard drives with your HDMI, with your Atomos. But with the one that's in there, all you do is pull it out, plug it in here, plug that into your computer, and you can read it just like any other hard drive on your computer. But that's where the reader for that is stored. So I'm going to put this back in here. Now, let's go into how we set up our headgear and how we're actually going to be using this to record. The first thing I want you to do is take your GoPro. You're going to notice there is a place with 3 different attachment points. All we're going to do is take that and we're going to screw that into the side headgear GoPro mount on the system. And that will just sit right there. It's pretty secure. It's not going to go anywhere. It shouldn't go anywhere. I am then going to take the power supply for the GoPro, and that just plugs into the back of the GoPro. The lens system, that's going to attach to the front of the headgear. Now, the first time I did it like this, and that's a little awkward. I probably recommend putting it where SWIS is going to be up. And you just screw it into the mounting point on the front of the headgear. And then what that lets you do, what that will look like at this point, is you have your headgear up, and you can actually articulate that sensor wherever you want. It can be pointed up, down, wherever it needs to be for the operator to be most comfortable and to see what they're going to see. So then that brings up the question of how do you actually see what the GoPro is going to see? Well, that's where this viewfind comes in. We're going to take the rest of the cables found in the headgear. There's 3 of them, 2 micro HDMI and 1 USB. Now, there's 2 micro HDMI. I'm going to use the one that's shorter, and that's going to go into the GoPro. It goes directly into the HDMI port on the GoPro, and that leaves me with my 2 longer cables, the longer HDMI and the USB, and these are going to go into the viewfind. The small micro USB plugs in at the back. The larger HDMI, the larger micro HDMI, I should say, plugs in right in front of that. And you get a system that looks kind of like that. Now, this isn't just a hanging system. Remember this gray mount? This front part actually fits the viewfind. There's a little circular knob inside of the viewfind, and there's actually a hole inside of the headgear. So that circular mount for the viewfind will fit right over that hole. It should pop right into place. That will hold it securely, so during the operation you can adjust the position of the viewfind and put it wherever is going to be most comfortable for you, where it won't be in the way, and at the same time it will be convenient to see what you're actually recording, so you can set the position of the recorder exactly where you want it to go. Now, what about the other end of the cables? Well, this is where things start to get a little more interesting. At the other end of these cables, you have 4 different options right now. You have 2 USB, and you also have a full-size HDMI and a mini HDMI. There's not the micro HDMI. This is halfway between the full-size and the mini. the HDMI feed from the GoPro is going to the full-size HDMI. So the first thing we're going to need is power. You're given 2 battery banks. That's really nice because if one runs out, you can immediately swap it out. To turn them on, you actually have to press that blue button, which should see blue indicators. Something I discovered when doing this, if the blue indicators are not on, it's not feeding power to anything. In other words, you can have everything plugged in and not get any power until you actually hit that blue power. That's kind of nice because it's not wasting power if it's unplugged and there's nothing there. So I'm going to take my USB cables, and those are just going to plug directly into my power supply. Now I have power to both the GoPro and the Viewfind. So I can go ahead and turn on the GoPro. The GoPro, if you haven't used them before, it's just holding down that front button. It'll beep, and it's already ready to record. Now, on the Viewfind, the power button is in the back, so you can actually press that down, and it'll flash blue, and in just a minute it'll turn off. You're not going to see anything. That's because, remember how there are 2 HDMI cables? The HDMI that's full size comes out of the GoPro. This mini HDMI is attached to the Viewfind. There's no signal between the two. Now remember, in our case, we actually have a mini to full size HDMI and a female to female adapter. We can actually take these, plug in the adapter, plug that into the female to female, plug that female to female into the GoPro, turn on our Viewfind. I'll have to show you what the Viewfind looks like. I'll have to figure out a way to get a video of that. But when we turn this on, I can now actually see what the GoPro is seeing. But this lets you see exactly what the GoPro is seeing, which right now, nothing's being recorded. We could hit record on the GoPro up here and record to our GoPro, and we have a complete system. But part of the power of this system is being able to record wirelessly to our wireless system that we set up earlier. So we need to pull out a few more pieces of equipment so we can do that. I'm going to unplug our adapter system here, although we're going to come back to this in a second. And I'm going to put these back in my case so that I know where they are. I'm going to pull out my wireless transmitter. The wireless transmitter has a mini USB power input because it needs power to actually transmit. So I'm going to grab this small full-size USB to mini USB. It's not micro, it's a mini USB. I'm going to plug this in, plug that into my power supply, and I get a blue light telling me that I'm now wirelessly transmitting. Still don't have anything to transmit because I don't have any input here. I can just plug in my HDMI from my GoPro. I went over here to my wireless system. I hit the power button. I had to make sure my GoPro was still on. And you're going to see in my wireless system the cameras that we're using because I now have a feed into my wireless system. Now, the problem with this at the moment is when I put this on, I still don't have my viewfinder working. This is the part that threw me off for a little bit. But we're going to look at one other piece of equipment, and that is an HDMI splitter. What this does is it takes one HDMI input and it sends it out to two signals, full-size HDMI. So I'm going to take my full-size HDMI out of my wireless transmitter. Remember, the full-size HDMI is what's coming out of the GoPro. I'm going to plug this guy in right here, and I get a red light because I need power to actually split the HDMI signal. Fortunately, I have one more mini USB in here. This one actually is a micro USB. I'm going to plug in my micro USB, and I'm going to plug this into the last port on my power supply. And now, besides a mess of cables, I have a split HDMI signal out of my GoPro. I'm going to take this HDMI cable that came in the system. I'm going to plug that into my splitter. I'm going to plug that into my wireless system. And I get a green light here, and I should start seeing. I now have a wireless system that is seeing what I'm seeing. I can plug this in, I can look down. That's my hand right there. Hi. Now, I'm still not seeing anything in here. That's because I have that other mini HDMI. I'm going to go back and grab my mini HDMI right here, plug that in, plug that into my HDMI splitter. Then I'm going to turn on my viewfind by pressing the power button in the back. It'll blink for a few seconds while it's looking for the HDMI signal. And now it's blue. And I put this on, and I can now see everything that my camera is seeing. I can readjust the position so I can get it in the right position for surgery. I'll be able to see the input signal right here. I can adjust the tightness on my headgear so that it fits loose, nice and tight. I'm not going to go anywhere. And remember our swanky bag that we had earlier? All I'm going to do is I'm going to take this entire setup, which is partly why I want the smaller HDMI, the wireless, the battery supply, the HDMI switcher, they all fit right in here. I can zip this up. This goes on around the waist. This cable goes around the back, and have a complete system. Kind of. It's completely wireless. There's no wires here, but at the same time, I can also see exactly what I'm actually going to be recording. This is a really cool system. I'm very excited that Dr. Smith is excited about it. I really know that he is looking forward to using it. The wireless system gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of what you're seeing, at making adjustments. Again, you can see my camera I'm recording to right there. Getting very close to what you're recording. Again, the adjustable focus lets you be very specific about what you want to record. The viewfinder can move up and down and out of the way as much as you want. All in all, it's a fantastic little system. Setup takes a few minutes, but my plan long term is to get this to the point where the doctor only needs to pull this out of the bag, plug in the power supply, turn things on, and he's all ready to go. It's a very flexible system, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what videos we can get in the OR from this system. So again, my name is Michael. On behalf of the Paso Spine Center and Dr. Dean Smith, thank you and have a good day.